couple things have happened. As you know, that I mentioned earlier, it's been one of the most unproductive Congresses in history. And part of the problem, and there's been a real bipartisan agreement on this. So many of the decisions are just being made in the Speaker's office. And so I talked with my Republican colleagues, asking them what's happening. They say, I don't know. And historically, I was in the Congress where for several hundred years, everything came up through the committee and then onto the full House under what we call open rules, where anybody could offer an amendment, have your idea argued, debated, voted on. And that hasn't been happening in recent years. I must say the good news is that the new Speaker, Ryan, is committed to regular order and open rules. And that's a good sign. In fact, he's been Speaker for a little over a couple of months, and we already passed a long-term transportation bill, an educational reform bill, a budget bill, a continuing resolution to fund the government, intelligence bill, and a number of things under an open rules. So I'm not expecting that he'll let everything come up under an open rule. As Mick Jagger in the Rolling Stones said, you can't always get what you want. But he's made a dramatic shift in that direction, and there's a lot of bipartisan, nonpartisan agreement and support for that. So that's the good news. There's still some things. I mean, I would like to have us consider immigration reform. We haven't been allowed to bring it up and consider it. And there's still a lot of bills that come up under a closed rule where you can't offer your amendments. Why is that important? Well, that's how you find the common ground. That's where the best ideas get a chance to be heard. That's where you find out and develop a measure of respect for your colleagues. And that is how you, historically in this country, have gotten things done. You can't have 2 or 3 people in the entire Congress running the show for the other 535 sitting around waiting for their photo op. So that's that's the good news. Then what is likely to happen? I gotta believe there's some support there for a cost of living increase for, say, Social Security. I have a measure in to provide that nobody under Social Security gets a payment below the level of poverty. So that would bring about a pretty dramatic increase for about 20% or so of the recipients. So nobody, like the gentleman that was here earlier was talking about, his wife wouldn't be faced with, those kind of circumstances. So I have a measure in to lift the cap to $250,000. I'd probably vote to lift it entirely if that was the only choice. But I think we can do some things here to bolster this fund. I've been pleased to find that many of the doctors now are favoring this single payer because they don't like having all the money coming into their office, having to going into administrative costs. I mean, I'm a pallet maker, okay? If I had to fill up a semi-load full of pallets and every pallet was different, I mean, I can't imagine what the cost of that is. Off the chart. So it's much easier. I can do different size pallets. I do a lot of different size pallets depending on the loads, but each semi-load is full of the same pallet. Okay? And that's why this single payer stuff becomes so much more efficient, because everybody's on the same plan. That doesn't mean you can't get supplemental, for some of the exotic stuff, and you can use your imagination what some of that is. Suffice to say, plastic surgery and implants and other, devices that you get that are not essential to healthy living but are being paid for. So you see more and more movement continuously from more and more forces for some kind of a single payer system. It doesn't mean you eliminate the insurance industry. Of course, there's going to be insurance for supplemental health and you know, a whole host of house and liability and protections for this, that, and everything else. You know, I think that's a good possibility. And I'll tell you something else, and I know you didn't come to hear this, and then we'll get back onto the Social Security, but I have, oh gosh, there are days when I have 25, 30 groups come through my office. And I don't see them if they're not from the 8th District here. And you know, one group says, you know, we need to spend more money on finding a cure for cancer. And I couldn't agree more. I've got a 40-year-old daughter with 4 children who's got advanced stage 4 lung cancer. And I know we all have friends and loved ones that have it. So I'm for that. I have people come in and say, you know, we need to do a better job of helping our kids get educated. And I say, boy, Andrew, I mean, I worked my way through the university, you know, raised a family, paid $100 a quarter. I can't imagine having to graduate with these massive debts that these kids have. And by the way, the average debt here in Minnesota, $28,000. That's not a $28,000 debt. Over 20 years, that's $128,000 you got to pay back. So, you know, I support that. I support that too. And then people say, well, we got to rebuild our roads, and the bridges are falling down, for crying out loud. Trains are coming off the track. Wastewater treatment facilities are poisoning our kids' brains with lead. You know, so, you know, I support that too. So here's something that's happening in the country. There's a real profound new awakening, nonpartisan, Democrats and Republicans, and a new recognition that, you know, you have to make choices in our business, in our individual lives. There got a lot of things we like to do, and we can't afford them all. And there's a new recognition that we got to stop and reconsider all these endless wars of choice that we're getting ourselves involved in the Middle East. And you see it playing out in the Republican campaign, you see it playing out in the Democratic presidential campaign. We spent $3 trillion in Iraq alone. $3 trillion. Well, think about it. For one of those trillion, we could have graduated every college kid in vocational school in America debt-free. For another one of those trillion, we could have rebuilt our roads, our bridges, and provided a cost of living increase for Social Security. For another one of those trillion, we could have given everybody $1 trillion tax break. You know, instead we got $2 trillion going forward to take care of the brave men and women, the patriots who served, and were badly injured. They lost arms, they lost legs, they had serious brain damage, and they say that's going to cost us another $2 trillion. Well, and we darn well should pay for that. They stood up to protect us, we should protect them. But the fact is, that is just one of those wars. There's one going on in Syria that we're involved in. There's one in Afghanistan that we're involved in. There's one going on in Yemen that we're involved in. And there are those who want us to get involved in the one in Libya. They want us to get involved in one with Iran. They want us to get involved with one in Somalia. And I ask people, you know, as a member, I got to make decisions on where the money's going to go. We only have so much money. So, you know, please be thinking about that as well. And even if you think that those wars are a good idea, even if you think you have to ask the question, can we afford them? Because between you and me, our military is so good, it is so strong, it can go into any country in the world and secure a peace. For at least as long as they're there. Okay? They can do that. They can do that. They're damn good. They're the best. There's none better. Okay? But how many of those can you do? How many countries in the world can you afford to send 500, 600, 700,000 soldiers in and pay the trillions of dollars that go with that? So I happen to think it's a bad idea, and I've lived in the Middle East. I've done business in the Middle East. I've studied Arabic. I know enough of the language to either get me into trouble or get me out of trouble. But I can tell you this, and we won't go through it, but if any of you want to at a later date, we've been on every side of this conflict, starting with the Mujahideen. We've supported them. They morphed into Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. I could go back. I could take you in through detail. The money we gave to the group that's now ISIS. We know Saddam Hussein had chemical weapons. How? Well, we had the receipts, we sold them to them.
That's right.
I could go on the problems that have been created by this whole thing are just beyond belief. So I happen to think it's a mistake, but even if you think it's a good idea, you got to think about whether or not we can afford it. Because those are the hard, cold facts. We have to make some hard decisions. And even if you think it's a good idea, you have to say, can you afford it? Because we all have things in our personal life we'd like to throw more money at. Good things, frivolous things in our business, and we just can't afford to do it all. So please think about that as you're thinking about where we're going as a nation, and when you go to your Republican and your Democratic caucuses and you talk to your representatives. This is a really critically important issue for us all to consider. And it all dovetails into all of this, and into the transportation, and into the education, into the roads, the bridges, the future of our economy, and all the rest. So forgive me, but I tell everybody this, because it's something I just have a very, very strong, passionate belief in, and a lot of personal experience. Nothing is ever as it appears in the Middle East. I'm telling you. And I'll just give you one last example. Another Republican and I, Kurt Clausen, we introduced an amendment, two amendments. One, to stop funding projects in Afghanistan that you can't audit and you can't inspect. Okay? Why? Well, it's the #1 terrorist narco state in the world. And if you can't audit it, you can't inspect it. You literally have to show up with a truckload full of cash. Well, good luck with that. The cash disappears and the projects don't get built.
That's right.
Another program that we introduced amendments to eliminate it is the program to train the so-called friendly Free Syrian rebels. We spent $1.2 billion and we got 5 guys out of the deal. You know, that's not conservative, that's not liberal, that's just downright stupid. We can't continue that. And what they don't like to tell you, we actually did train more than 5 guys. Okay? Yeah, that's exactly. No, they're fighting for ISIS. They just took our money and our arms. So we got to recon. But let's get back to Social Security, and please consider what I've said.
In the legislature, some of the insurance companies and the drug companies have so much power.
They do.
And so, to get this done, and their power, I don't know how to ask it, but how can it be done when they have so much power?
Yeah. Well, there's some Republican and Democratic candidates for president. They're calling for a political revolution. I don't want to mention any names, but we're all watching the news. It's going to take that. Wall Street has 10 lobbyists for every member of Congress. Yeah, and they're powerful. The insurance companies, the pharmaceutical companies. And they don't give money to campaigns out of the goodness of their heart. I mean, the $25, $30 contribution, I mean, they're not really expecting a lot, other than someone to just do what's right. But these elections are just getting obscene. My 2 last election contests were among the 2 most expensive in the country, over $20 million. And this next one looks like it might be 35, 40 million. So, that's a part of the problem for 2 reasons. One is regular order takes time. And when you get elected now, both the Republicans and Democrats have call centers across the street. And they say you should spend 30 hours a week in the call center across the street dialing for dollars. Really, and you should spend another 10 hours a week having fundraising events, breakfast, luncheons, cocktails. Well, that's 40. I have to go out there and back every week. It's a 7-hour trip from door to door. Well, that's 14. That's 54 hours, and you haven't spent any time governing yet? I mean, as a practical matter, if people are spending all this time raising money, they don't have time to govern. Now, I came out, as one of the 10 most effective. Part of it's because I just don't go to the call centers across the street. I haven't been in them. Not going to them either. Not at my age. I didn't want to come back here and say, here I did thanks for getting me elected. I went out to Washington, I raised a lot of money so I could get reelected. That's a fool's errand. You know, unless you're some youngster and want to be senator or president or something like that. I just want to pay something back. Country's been good to my generation. So I am able to go there and to make a difference. And like I said, I have a Republican partner in everything I do, because I'm in the minority. So we got to reverse Citizens United, in my judgment. We have to put some limits on campaign time and spending. Most democracies in the world have elections that go from 40 to 50 days. I don't know, my legislation calls for yeah, my election bill calls for 50. I don't know if that's the magic number, but I know it's not 365 days a year every year. I'm pretty sure of that. Stop the gerrymandering.
Could I ask you a question about that single server?
Actually, there's another important answer to this later.
Yeah, she has a question, then we'll go to you.
Is joining your organization a good way to get through this issue? My husband and I have always been lucky and had really good health insurance, and we haven't been on Medicare very much. And I went to pick up my prescription at the last third of the year, and a generic for $668. Not believe that. And then I asked my doctor, why is that? How can it be? It's a generic.
Generic.
Because he says, and of course he's spoken like we've been talking about, is that there's only a few companies that produce that drug, and so they can charge whatever they want.
And, yeah, so a couple things, you know, and as you know, Congress is a tough nut to crack, but there are some things that can be done at the state level.